Ex-cult members of Reddit, how were you introduced to the cult and how did you manage to escape?
Silent scan.
Whoa, didn't expect anyone to even see this. I'm fine with disclosing what I know, which admittedly isn't a whole lot. My mom was always into the new age stuff while I was growing up. She started pretty low-key with things like tarot cards, crystals, incense etc. graduated to Ouija boards, and eventually channeling. I have memories from when I was like 7 years old, of my mother sitting around in our living room with the board and loads of candles and crystals, and she'd speak with a low voice. She was supposedly channeling spirits at this time. Although I remember even at a young age not being convinced by what I was sure was a performance on her part. The voices that came out of her sounded like her doing silly voices. I don't pretend to know her beliefs super well, mine are pretty pedestrian as well. I like to stick to science. I went balls deep into Christianity when I was in my teens, but I eventually clawed my way out of that belief system and minced it. There were just things that I couldn't accept and could never seem to reconcile within myself. So I guess that makes me agnostic. I don't care. I never felt like I had to identify with a label or group. My mother has sort of always been a piece of work. She was sent to an all-girls school in her teens, somewhere in Pennsylvania. That's where both her and I were born, and she hated it so much, she devised a plan to get kicked out, which involved sneaking out and getting pregnant with a boy from a neighboring all-boys school. Enter my big brother Jacob. I don't know him well. My mother's family basically decided for her that she wasn't of the right mind or age to care for a child, so Jacob wound up being adopted by family friends. They raised him. My mother had a very cursory, in and out relationship with her first son. Eventually she went on to have my older sister, Esprit. Different father. Then she met my father, a charismatic jazz pianist who was 25 years older at the time. They actually got married, but honestly both of them are so unhinged that it didn't last even a year. I was born during that time. The day I was born, my father was drunk at the bar and my mother, no lie, checked out of the hospital without me. Always thought it was funny that trend never went away. 29 years later and my dad's still drinking his days away, and my mother is nowhere to be found. When I was 9, I'd been living with my mom during the week and saw my dad on weekends. Dad was more fun. Drunks usually are. Mom was a control freak. Very dramatic. Anyway, up till that point, I'd lived with her. We moved a lot. I'd been in 7 schools by the time I was 9. She couldn't sit still anywhere. Never could make it home. Always on the run. Eventually she had my little sister. Named her Kyle, for whatever reason. Different father. She married him too. Then left him behind. One day, she asked me where I wanted to live. Apparently she had met a new guy named Mark, and he was really into this new age alien stuff, and she decided she was going to pack up her life and live with him. We lived in Pennsylvania, Mark lived in New Jersey, so I opted to move in with my dad full-time. She ended up moving to Jersey and taking my 2 sisters with her. Since that day, and that was 20 years ago, I've seen my mother once. I was 13 the last time I saw her. She invited me to her home in Florida for a week out of the blue. She had changed her name about 5 more times since the last time I saw her. She was Diana Herhenreiter at birth, took her aunt's name and went by Kate Katie. She had a pen name for a while which was Anaya Reed. That always made me laugh. When I was a kid, 2nd grade, I had a classmate named Anaya. I remember because I kind of liked her. That's how my mother heard the name Anaya. I found out years later that she adopted it for herself. By the time I saw her in Florida when I was 13, she had moved to England and married a man over there named Michael Dean. She changed her name from Anaya Reed to Anna Hayes, and finally to Ashley Dean. Michael seemed nice enough. It was after they got married that the cult really formed. He was known by the followers as a Zertonian or something like that. To this day, I have no idea what exactly they preach. All I know is that she holds seminars which are considered non-profit because she's a religious organization. So she keeps the ticket sales she makes. It was about $1,000 a ticket per person per seminar, with 75 to 100 people attending per seminar. She pockets all of that money and gets to call it tithing. My mother stood in front of a seminar full of people in Amsterdam in 2006, and she told them this very sad story about me. I was shocked to learn about it. One of her ex-followers actually sought me out and sent me the tape. I was livid. She said my father poisoned me against her since I was just a baby. That the state had taken me away from my father and put me in a boarding school for kids who acted up. She said that she loved me and wants what's best for me, but that she was afraid of me because I might burn her house down or something. And what's even better, is that she claims to have made something called a soul contract. You see, the Ashiana walking around on Earth today, isn't my mother. It's my mother's body. Apparently Ashiana made a deal, a soul contract, with Katie my mother, and Katie ascended, and Ashiana took her place. She uses this to explain why she's still addicted to cigarettes, or why she's a little distant from her family. She gets to take zero responsibility for her life decisions. Abandoning children. Defaming their name and spreading mistruths. This is what I know. My mother wasn't a mother to me. But she taught me valuable lessons about people and dependability. I don't miss her. I was honestly better off. She is a pathological liar, and she's been on the run for her whole life. Running from something. Running from herself. She never stays in one place too long, never commits to a relationship for too long, and always has an excuse. She's changed her name 5 times and pretends she hasn't. She has even gone to the lengths of blaming the supernatural, rather than taking some responsibility herself. She's claimed to have been abducted by aliens on multiple occasions, even as a child. Which was funny to me, because I was there during some of these abductions, don't seem to remember them. And what's more interesting to point out, is that her interest in New Age stuff wasn't in aliens or extraterrestrials in the beginning, and it wasn't for a very long time. Not until she met Mark, right before she left me. She was more interested in spirits and witches and the occult. She's a very smart woman. Very well spoken. Speaks very fast, and with a certain clarity and confidence that really fools people into thinking she knows her shit. She speaks with a charisma that draws people in. Hitler did that too. She takes in thousands of dollars and pays 0 taxes on it, and gets to travel all around the world to spread whatever gospel it is she spreads. She makes sure that it's all a little too complicated for the average person, convincing them that they basically need her in order to make sense of it, and she bullshits her way through it by sounding like an authoritative voice on the matter.
Silent scan.
I've covered this when I first got on Reddit, but my parents joined a cult in West Texas when I was about 8 to 9, after searching for the truth their whole adult lives. Long story short, it wasn't that crazy at first. I like to use the frog in boiling water analogy. If it was that batshit insane when they first started going, they wouldn't have stayed. It became a doomsday cult, multiple marriage, all the girls were married up by old elders, leaving nothing for us young dudes, so naturally, we rebelled. My escape wasn't as harrowing as some others, but my leaving did set up me saving my 15-year-old sister, under cover of darkness, abducting her from my dad's house and transporting her to my mom-in-law, for marrying an elder who already had 4 wives and about 10 kids, who was later arrested for molesting his stepdaughter. It's been a wild ride, guys.
Silent scan.
I literally walked into the Church of Scientology. I moved to Clearwater as a minor, made some friends, and walked into without anyone present with me into what I thought was a museum. Being brought up without any religion, although both my parents were raised conservative Muslims, I grabbed onto the ideology of you are what you make of yourself. Long story short, 5 years later, while working for a Scientology-owned company while still exploring whether I wanted to join or not, I got held hostage literally for 3 hours, because I wouldn't accept their philosophy on a small incident, and left the workforce only to have a beer bottle broken over my head by my LTR lifelong Scientologist boyfriend, and had the cops who were Scientologists arrive at the house, to determine there was nothing to escalate to a domestic violence report, and then later on 2 days later flee the house with my dogs, and what little I cut with the time I had for my own safety. So yeah, that's my life in the cult. Some people are cool, most people are brainwashed.
Silent scan.
Finally, something I can share. I don't know if a lot of people have heard of William Branham, but he was friends with Jim Jones of Jonestown Massacre fame. I was born into a church in an island in the Caribbean, where the pastor had his fingers in everyone's lives, and they saw William Branham as a prophet sent in the end times to usher in the rapture. Think old school hardcore Pentecostal, but with access to people's finances as well. Well, my parents got tired of that and moved to a state, the Midwest United States, where they had a sister church that was a bit more liberal. The pastor didn't ask how much people made. All of these churches taught that holiness required that women not cut their hair or wear pants or makeup. Men couldn't wear shorts or have facial hair. Smoking and drinking were explicitly not allowed. I was raised in this and didn't know any better. At 16 years old, our pastor had a vision to move out west, so the entire Midwest church up and left for a state in the West United States. Growing up, my parents were more liberal than most, and I had a very happy childhood. When I reached 18, I was finally allowed to date. Dating is very strict, and they split it into 3 phases, their term. Because of the distance the church puts on you and the other person, anyone dating is really making a beeline towards marriage, getting laid. Most kids are scared of the world ending and ending up in heaven a virgin, so as soon as someone is 18, most people in the church marry. Phase 1 is simply talking to a girl. For most youth get-together, sexes are split, and if a guy is seen talking to a girl for more than a few minutes at a time, he better be ready to explain himself to the church leaders. If he likes a girl, he can tell the leadership he wants to get to know a girl better, and they are officially in first phase. At first phase, you are allowed to talk to that specific girl, and that is it. No touching or hand holding. Phase 2 is when you are officially dating someone. You are allowed to hold hands but nothing else. At this point, you need to talk to the girl's parents to make sure they are okay with you dating their daughter. Most parents require a chaperone at this point, since they are allowed to go on dates at this point. Phase 3 is engagement. At this point, you ask the woman's father for his permission to marry, and then you propose. Kissing is still not allowed at this point. On paper no one kisses before their wedding day, however in practice most couples end up sneaking kisses and more, except penetrative sex, during this point. It also depends on the parents since some parents are super strict about chaperones, and some aren't. I married at 20, which was pretty old, but my ex-wife had barely turned 18. We were both kids and had no clue what we were doing. I was required to marry someone in the church, so I had few options as to who I could marry. The local church only has around 100 people, so during church conventions where 1 to 2K people would gather, it was a veritable dating frenzy. I was very sincere in my belief of the church, and when I married it was to have kids and to keep the church going. My ex-wife however had only started going to the church since she was 13, so she wasn't as brainwashed as I was, and eventually left me for another man. I agonized a lot over this, and eventually started seeing a therapist for couples counseling. Normally you see the pastor for counseling, but since she had left the church, she refused to see the pastor, so I told her I was willing to go to a regular therapist. She ended up only attending 1 meeting, and I kept going at first hoping to convince her to go, then eventually just using it as regular therapy. The therapist convinced me to follow my passion for Latin dancing. Dancing was strictly not allowed in the church, unless it was in the spirit, which meant you basically marched to music. Dancing taught me to treat women as equals and taught me confidence. Before I was never allowed to touch or hug women I wasn't related to, but during dancing I learned that touching is natural and normal. I eventually left the church at 25 years old and had my first drink. The church basically teaches you that 1 drink will get you drunk, so imagine my disappointment at my first margarita. I became a flight attendant and married another flight attendant. She has been amazing and has opened my eyes so much. I had to learn to make love again as missionary was pretty much the only thing I knew. We also just started a cannabis-based business. If you guys want to know more, maybe I'll do an AMA.
Silent scan.
I ran away from home at 16 and joined this weird spiritualistic cult. They didn't have any gods, but they believed a lot in spirits and ancestors and stuff. We all lived in this big house owned by the leader guy. His name was Jonathan. Jonathan had a special kind of connection to the spirit world or whatever. They were all super good people. They took me in, gave me food and clothes and stuff. One of the guys gave me a job in his company. They had a lot of rituals and stuff we all did, with a huge emphasis on community and common good and honoring the dead. It wasn't a bad thing, so does that make it not a cult? I dunno, they did require a lot of dedication to the group and stuff. I believe 5% of income had to go to the cult to help Jonathan with rent, and so they could all buy food and shit. I lived with them for a few years. They got me through high school, and without them I never would have gone to college, which is the reason I left and where I am not. I meant where I am now.
Silent scan.
When my mother met and married my first stepfather, I was 4 or 5 years old. He began to introduce me to the cult he belonged to almost immediately. I don't think that my mother realized he was in one, although he was trying to get her into it slowly. During evenings when my mother went out, or weekends whenever he could get me alone, or school holidays, or times when he'd come get me to take me out of school, he would work on teaching me to be a member of the cult he believed in. Whenever my mom wasn't around, there were training sessions and practice sessions for his cult. Eventually, there were times when he'd get me in the middle of the week from school and take me to a group camp sort of place that other members of his group set up for extended activities. Sometimes they would trade children for the getaway period, like swap us back and forth for cross-training. Once in a very great while a kid there would die, but usually those were the kids that were just picked up and not legally parts of their families, so they didn't have to make excuses for them missing. I was very lucky, because my stepdad didn't like to share me, so I was never cross-trained. My mother helped my stepfather in a lot of what he did, not because she knew what he was doing and involved in, but because she was naturally a hateful sort of person who helped him in isolating and keeping me from making any long-term friends. She refused to let me watch television, listen to radio or music, go to parties or special events. It was a lot like being a Jehovah's Witness family, but she wasn't one. She just didn't want me around and did not want me to inconvenience her in any way. So the house was closed to me. I was restricted to my room for most of my life as a child by her, and that helped him because it gave him a lot more access and control over me. My stepdad's cult was a sexual slavery group. They believed that women were naturally inferior and meant to be slaves. My training was to teach me how to be a slave, how to endure pain, long terms of time in poses holding things, or being furniture, and what he called preparations for my womanhood. By the time I was around 8 or 9, he was trying to get my mom into softer versions of what he was doing with me with his buddies in his group. He started by trying to get her to do swinging and wife swapping and stuff, but my mom was naturally a prude who actually hated sex in the first place, which kinda made things worse on me, and made him more impatient. By the time I was 8 and 9, I told a childhood friend some of the stuff he did, but not about the camps and the poses and training and the kids that were expendable. She told her mother, who told my mother that I was being molested, and there was a lot of screaming and shouting in the house, and the embarrassing interviews with her interrogating me and being really angry at me, and I was so scared, because of the threats he'd made, but also because she was so furious with me, that I minimalized what he was doing, and kept it to just the preparing me for womanhood bits. She separated from him for 3 months, but it was too hard for her to make it on just her own income, and she was too proud to ask for help, and refused to go on any kind of assistance, because she didn't want to be a welfare mom, like all the wetbacks she hated, so she took me back to him, and basically just gave me to him. I tried to tell her that he was starting stuff again, and I was told that she was just too tired to hear it right now, so I never tried to get help from her again. By the time I was between 10 and 11 years old, I'd begun to read books about child abuse, molestation, and cults. I couldn't find anything about the sexual slavery parts of it, but there was enough there already for me to understand that what was being done was wrong, and to fight it. I began to refuse him. Every day was a battle of screaming, shouting, throwing things, hitting each other, while my mother would then punish me for being disrespectful to my stepfather. In the end, he was trying to rape me in the afternoons, and I was stalking the house at night while he slept with a knife in my hands, trying to get the nerve to kill them both in their sleep. Just as I was ready and prepared to do it, I had stuff packed and everything, he just disappeared. After a week of him being gone, my mother told me that he had been having an affair with another lady, who was only 17 years old, but had a 2-year-old daughter already, and that she kicked him out for cheating on her. That's how I got out of the cult. However, later on as an adult, I stupidly ended up with another guy who was into the same things. He started out trying to pass it off as just an interest in normal bondage fetishes. But in the end, I found out he was with the same group of people, who are now apparently internationally spread out with private compounds and vacation places all over the map. It tore me up when I realized it. I called the police and changed the locks when I found the boxes and boxes of his private photo collection at the camps he went to, with the other men posing with women tied up, cut up, unconscious, and beaten. So that was the second time I escaped from that kind of cult. It has now been 13 years since I earned that freedom.
Silent scan.
Joined the 12 tribes of Israel back in 2012, I met them through one of their cafes in Colorado. The idea of communal living and dedication to a cause was very appealing to someone who hadn't had a job in a while, and was going to lose their home soon. The mask of super friendliness and hospitality was covering up racism, child abuse, and total domination of people's lives. I mean total. From what time you woke up, to how you dress, to how to wipe your ass. Spent 3 years of my life there, working 12 to 16-hour days 6 days a week. I was being groomed to get married and become a leader in the community when I left with just some clothes. The controlling nature of the place made it feel like a prison camp, and I couldn't take it anymore. A year and a half later and I'm the happiest I've ever been.
Silent scan.